Welcome to American Racing Snobs, the final Snobs of 2019 as we wrap up the calendar year on the Formula One World Championship. Tony Rizzuti with you, and as always, my good friend and former ESPN The Magazine F1 correspondent, he is Eric Morse. Eric, the season has come to an end. I was excited to watch the final race in Abu Dhabi, but at the same time, a little bit sad that we're not going to have Sundays with lights going out and licking a stamp and sending it until March 13th. First time cars will be back on track down in Australia.
It's a tinge of sadness, but I'm ready to see the order jumbled up a bit. I mean, we got a good run with these cars. Lewis Hamilton putting his stamp of authority on this season early and often.
Yes, he did.
And wow, did he close it out in style. A Grand Slam.
Unbelievable.
I thought Grand Slams were a thing of the past as soon as they brought back this, or introduced this point for fastest lap. Well, I was like, well, that's a cheap point for whoever's running in 5th or 6th and has a free pit stop. Somebody's going to have a strategy that's going to have a faster car than the leader at the end of each race. So I thought those days were over. Lewis was probably going to be eternally parked at 5 Grand Slams for his career. Instead, goes out on the next to last lap on a set of worn hard tires.
Where have we heard this before?
Yeah, but this time he was actually in the lead for the entire race, so the Grand Slam was on offer, and be damned if he didn't go out and get it.
He's so incredible at making tires last, and not just last so that you can finish, but last so you can lay down a lap. He truly is one of a kind.
The fact that he was able to, harvest the energy, load up the battery, all that. He had, a 17, 18-second lead on Max Verstappen at that point? He was kind of controlling the race from the get-go, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago. If Lewis Hamilton gets to turn 1 first, it's game over.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, he's going to walk that race, and who's going to stand on the top step of the podium is never in question. If it's Bottas, if it's either of the Ferraris, if it's Verstappen, you're like, okay, how's this going to play out? Yeah. Who's going to get there? Who's going to be closing in at the end? When Lewis Hamilton is 2nd, 3rd, 4th, even 5th, you think he's got a shot to do something, to charge at the end, because all the options that, 1, the Mercedes is so good at its tire management, and 2, Lewis in particular, so good at having something left for the end of the race. But if he leads from the onset, it's game over, and that's exactly what it was on Sunday.
He's so good in controlling the pace and controlling his tires and doing what it has to do. He's one of the best wheel-to-wheel drivers out there, and if you leave it to strategy with him in the front, Mercedes doesn't make sloppy mistakes. They make them sometimes from behind when they're trying to make something happen. Obviously, if Toto's there, he wasn't there in Brazil, and James Allison admitted they called a sloppy race, but it rarely happens. And as you said, once he took the lead, we knew it was over. And when I made my pick of Max Verstappen going in, I can't remember if I said it on the podcast or not, but after watching the 2018 version of the race, when Lewis did basically the same thing, just totally dominated, I couldn't see where the Red Bull had closed that much. But then I'm thinking, man, they were so fast at Brazil with some long straightaways. Maybe Red Bull's found something. And I'm thinking, it's towards the end. Does Lewis have anything left in his engine? I should have gone Lewis from the get-go.
It seems obvious in retrospect, but I don't think
Max looked really good.
I don't think anybody expected Mercedes to be that far in front of everybody in a straight fight, because it was more or less a straight fight with Max Verstappen. Max got bottled up behind Charles Leclerc on the start. After qualifying on the front row, the Red Bull got mugged on a straight line on the opening lap by Charles Leclerc. Max did a great job of keeping Sebastian Vettel behind him. And then, lap 11 or 12? Ferrari with the bizarre strategy on the double stack. I don't know where that came from. I don't see the advantage of trying to get both cars in. There was no massive cliff that the cars were going to fall off, and they should have been on completely different strategies. Because Vettel started on the softs, on the reds, and Leclerc, like Hamilton and Verstappen, had started on the mediums. He should have been able to extend.
It made zero sense, Eric.
If Leclerc just mirrors Max Verstappen's strategy, he should be in the fight for him to finish second, because he's in front of him, and he's got that straight line. Plus, there was no DRS for 18 laps. They pitted before they fixed that DRS problem. We still don't know exactly what caused that, but it was lap 18 that they enabled DRS for the first time. Leclerc should have had no problem defending. I don't know why they pitted him so early, and then why they took the risk on the double stack. And, of course, they messed it up because
they do.
Because Ferrari 2019.
I screamed at the television, "What are you doing?" And after I saw it get all messed up, I mean, it worked out for Leclerc somewhat. He came out in front of Verstappen, if you remember right. I think it was lap 32. It was really the best lap of the race when Verstappen and Leclerc went 3 wide around one of the Williams, and Verstappen just got the elbows out and just about shoved him at the end of the backstretch into the corner. Then they swapped again. Then they went into kind of that marina section, and once again, Max just shut the door. It was a great lap of the race, but for Vettel, it made 0 sense. For him, and
I think it ultimately cost him a spot to Valtteri Bottas because he finished in the 5th position where he should have been at least 4th.
And I was thinking to myself, I don't know that Ferrari is better off with Binotto on the box than they were with Arrivabene. And I know neither one of them calls the strategy, right? They got guys that call the strategy, but
a lot of this comes from computers and Maranello. But at some point,
Arrivabene didn't make that many mistakes last year. They just weren't fast enough. And this year, first half of the year, they weren't fast at all. They were horrible. They're really good in testing. And then at Bahrain, where they blew up Leclerc's engine and Vettel spun out of contention. They were much better the second half of the season up until Austin. We'll talk about that in a little bit. After they started to be accused of cheating, how suddenly they fell off a cliff. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I just don't know that this Ferrari team under new leadership was any better off than the last leadership. Now, maybe behind the scenes something just had to change, but they've got a lot of soul-searching to do in Maranello. For sure. They have not delivered. They looked awful the last 3 races. Yeah, they have not delivered on the potential of their car for the better part of, 3 years now? And now that they've got pace from Leclerc, and that's not a knock on Kimi Räikkönen, but it's obvious that Leclerc is quicker than Sebastian. If you're being honest with yourself, and they're being honest, Leclerc's the number 1 on that team, if there is such a thing. We went to a night at the races with Leigh Diffey, David Hobbs, and Steve Machett. We'll give you a review of that once we get done with the Formula One stuff here. But even Machett said, that kid's the number 1, whatever that means, because some teams don't claim a 1 or 2. But he goes, if we're talking about pure pace and what they've done in the race car, he's the number 1. Based on 2019, absolutely. But that can change quickly. Sure it can. If you come out of the box strong in 2020 and you earn that support, you'll start getting those decisions. Because usually, especially early on in the year, the car that is leading at that particular Grand Prix will get the preferential strategy. That's something that can be earned on a week-to-week basis. But right now, going into the offseason, as you said, not only soul-searching for the boys in red, but especially Sebastian Vettel, who, by the way, is a new father. Yep. None of us knew that was coming. Nope. Found that out on Thursday. Very, very secretive, these German Formula One drivers, as he now a father 3 times over, his first son. So congratulations to the Vettel family. Wasn't able to back it up with the race weekend that he was looking for. Had a sloppy weekend for car number 5. Yeah. Had that crash in free practice. A very bizarre spin in qualifying that luckily didn't cost him anything other than maybe some embarrassment. That's kind of like a video game move where you're backing up the corner to start your flying lap, and then you put the gas down, and all of a sudden you're backwards. Later in the show, we're going to talk about the 2020 testing at Abu Dhabi. Mm-hmm. Do you know he wrecked? Again? He and Checo went into that hairpin at the end of the second back stretch going into the marina section. Mm-hmm. They went in there side by side, and he got turned around and got a puncture. All I saw was the testing. I saw that Bottas was quick and that everybody hates the tires. Yeah. That's all I saw. We'll get into that in a little bit. You and I have talked at length in several of these shows about DRS. I'm a big fan of it. I get it's gimmicky, but I think it works. We're all justified. Yeah. Everybody's on board. Every driver said not having it was horrible. And I still don't know why they didn't have it. That was 18 laps at the beginning of the race. It sounded like a technical glitch where they couldn't reliably trust the detection point to say that you were within a second at the detection point to get onto that next straightaway. So I suppose that's the only fair thing is to disable it until it's working. That's what they did. There was a little bit of passing, but as soon as those cars were unleashed as it was with the DRS, they were just flying by each other. I think one of the Renaults came screaming past. Hülkenberg had been holding up a couple cars. I think it was Albon
Bottas especially was a victim of the DRS because he was coming from the back with a fresh power plant.
It ruined his chance at podium. I think he podiums with it.
I think he's got a shot at it for sure. I'm not sure if with that Ferrari strategy, if Ferrari ever had anything for Max Verstappen, I'm not sure that Bottas could have. But if he got past Sebastian Vettel, he did have the assistance of that poor pit stop when they double stacked Seb there. Ferrari on a two-stop strategy kind of surprised all of us because the top two came across on a one-stopper.
Mm-hmm. Well, they can't preserve tires. That's a huge thing they got to fix, and that's why when we'll stay on DRS, but when we get to Ferrari, I mean, well, we'll get to that in a second. Let's finish up on DRS. Danny Ricciardo came out after the race and said, none of us have ever really been too high on it. It is very gimmicky. We shouldn't need it. But he said now after experiencing without it, it is something that a modern Formula One car has to have. We have to have it. Hopefully in 2021 we won't need it. I think we probably will still have it. But he came out and said it was night and day difference without it, that they have to have it. I think Bottas said it ruined any chance. He got stuck behind cars he had no business behind because he couldn't get a run on them to make a move. You got close enough, it just stalled out without the DRS. So I think you and I are justified. Now everybody's kind of justified in saying, gimmick or not, it's needed in a modern car.
Well, now you've got the data.
Cars have changed.
You've run the experiment. You had your control group. Experiment confirmed. This is a good thing. I think we can all agree with that after watching Sunday.
Ferrari, we go into the Austin race, and I guess it was Max Verstappen was the first one to really get up on his soapbox and say they're cheating with leaking fuel down into the car.
And that led to a technical directive, which, by the way, I had to do some reading up on this. A technical directive is different than a sporting regulation. Sporting regulation is written into the book before the season. Any violation of the sporting regulations leads to on-track penalties, whether that's disqualification, demotion, exclusion from qualifying, that sort of thing. This fuel burn thing, as well as what later came up in Ferrari's weekend with Charles Leclerc, came from a technical directive, which is basically when a team asks for clarification. That's like, say, Christian Horner saying, hey, we're working with Honda on something. Is it legal if we do this? And that's asking the stewards for clarification. And sometimes you ask pointed questions because you know someone is doing something, kind of like that whole brake-by-wire with Renault and the programming of the automatic braking points that I think it was Racing Point filed against Renault earlier this year. That started from a technical direction where you ask the FIA, can you please clarify the legality of such and such? And that's kind of what started this with Max Verstappen back in Austin, and then we saw it come back to us in Abu Dhabi.
Wouldn't you agree, though, for at least the 3 races, maybe 4, prior to Austin, I'm not saying they were the best car on the grid, but the fastest car on the grid, and it wasn't really all that close, was the Ferrari. The Ferrari was a completely different car from Singapore on. It was like, we're all like, God, man, this had been a hell of a season if they'd started out that way. Then the directive comes, and Eric, they have been lousy. They haven't been faster than the Red Bull.
Their qualifying pace went away. They were not getting results after Singapore. You look at it, they didn't have a double podium after Singapore, and you're looking at Mercedes, 1-2 in Russia, 1-3 in Japan, 1-3 in Mexico, 1-2 in Austin. It didn't just start in Austin. I think that's where we saw their qualifying pace kind of fall back down.
But they weren't blowing by people on the straightaways either. They weren't going.
Yeah, I think the reason of what I just said is probably the tire wear. You know, you look at the 3 factors that make an F1 car work: straight line speed, cornering speed, and tire life. Being able to switch on the tires without destroying them. Ferrari started the season with great straight line speed, and they're pretty reasonable on tires. They just had no handling in the corners. They couldn't live with the slow sectors with the Mercedes. They pile on all that downforce to solve that problem, and all of a sudden their tire life goes out the window. I think that was what was hurting them in that stretch from Russia up to Austin. To your point, all this legality about are they intentionally leaking oil and violating not necessarily the letter of the law, but maybe the spirit of the oil burn limits and the fuel flow limits that are imposed on these turbo hybrid engines. I'm not going to say there's a direct correlation, but sure, it definitely looks like Ferrari lost a little bit of their oomph.
That
as
car
soon as
changed completely. The last 3 races, that was a different race car.
But
now,
how much of that is experimentation for next year?
So that's the question, right? But if it is, whatever direction they're going is the wrong direction because their tire wear wasn't any better in any of these other races, and they didn't have the speed, and I didn't see them any faster than in the corners than anybody else.
They were awful in the corners. Did you see the splits in qualifying?
Yes.
Because Ferrari just murdered them.
That's what I'm saying.
They murdered them in the straight line, so maybe that oomph isn't completely gone.
So if the argument is, no, they're already working on stuff for next year to try to figure out how to be better overall, well, that ain't work. The direction they're going ain't working.
But just because you're trying it doesn't mean it's going to.
I don't think they're trying it. I think they got busted.
0.6 of a second down in Sector 3 was Charles Leclerc to Lewis Hamilton. 0.6 of a second after being basically even or up a little bit on the Mercedes through Sectors 1 and 2. Lewis was just smashing them. We knew that Bottas was going to the back, but Hamilton was really on form this past weekend.
He was. He was on it. Nobody was going to touch him.
Yeah, he just woke up and pissed excellence pretty much the whole weekend. It's his first pole since Germany. And we talked about how he gets when he leads that first corner, basically, and checks out. A couple of mind-bending numbers.
All right.
Hobbs threw this one at me. I actually had it in my notes already, but I love that Hobbs is so up on the wheel with these stats and stuff. Still, at his age, he still dives into the details, even though he's not paid to anymore. 19th time that Lewis has led from lights to checker in his career. That ties Ayrton Senna for the most all-time for Grand Prix where you've led every lap.
And you had him where in your all-time top 10 list?
I had him P3, I believe. P3. That is 50th win from pole. His 6th Grand Slam and the first from 2017. I mentioned how mind-bending that is to me because I never thought I'd see another one again. His 17th podium of the season, which ties the record held by Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, and Lewis Hamilton. This is now the 4th time he has put up 17 podiums. He doesn't get that penalty in Brazil. He would have set the Formula One record with 18. He's now only 4 podiums behind Michael Schumacher's all-time mark of 155 in his career. And this is the most insane stat of them all to me. 33rd straight race in the points for Lewis Hamilton, tying his own record. And by the way, those are back-to-back streaks with a single race in between. And if it wasn't for a fuel pressure issue in Austria in 2018, that would be 67 consecutive races in the points. The second longest streak is only 27 races back when Kimi Räikkönen drove for Lotus. We've never seen anything like this.
I know.
Ever.
That's why I had him number 2. And if he ties Schumacher, I have him number 1.
I already had him ahead of Schumacher, but you knew that.
He was unbelievable. Red Bull, I thought maybe they had found something. Maybe it was the altitude in Mexico City that made them look a lot faster. Maybe being down in Brazil, there were enough of the twisty bits in that track that allowed Max to look so overpowering in that race. But Max did what he needed to do. That car isn't at the level that Mercedes is. He has not reached that level of Lewis Hamilton. Lewis is still the best out there. Max has incredible talent, and he's closing that gap, and he's experience-wise grossly behind where Hamilton is, and I think Hamilton right now is at his peak.
I don't think there was anything wrong with Max's drive.
But second place continues the Red Bull doing what it needs to do by all. If you go chalk, if you go way it should go based on what's spent and the amount of resources available, that Red Bull, regardless of who's driving it, should finish 5th and 6th in every race. And Max is putting podiums up there, and Albon did what he needed to do to finish 6th, so it was a good year for Red Bull, I think.
Max is punching above his weight level. I think that's obvious that Red Bull has put a car underneath him that is capable of winning a race, but definitely not capable of winning a championship. Mm-hmm. To win a championship, you have to be in that fight 8 out of 10 weekends, which I guess is 4 out of 5 if you want to reduce your fractions for those math nerds out there.
I was told there'd be no math.
Yeah. But it also means that if Max doesn't have a car that's capable of winning the world championship, there are going to be days like Abu Dhabi where even if he does everything right and everything functions perfectly, Lewis is still going to, what is it, Hobbs said, bollock off down the road.
Yeah, I love that.
The other thing is Max had that power issue, and Honda did apologize to the team. They believe it's a glitch in the power unit control system. I don't know if it's something about the torque range that where Max and how he squeezes the throttle on, but it always seems to be him. You never hear Gasly or Albon on the radio complaining about it, or if you do, maybe they're just not a factor in the race, so it doesn't tend to make the world feed broadcast air. But this is a theme with Max, that while the car doesn't seem to be lacking top-end power, when he's accelerating, there are little gaps in the torque map. And I don't know if that's completely software-driven, if it's a mechanical flaw in this particular Honda engine. But Honda's come such a hard way, this seems like a small issue. And obviously, 18 seconds down the road, that is not going to be explained by one little glitch there. Max even said that post-race, that it's not like he was on for a victory and that cost him. Second was about where he deserved to be, but that could help explain the size of the gap. Because we don't have Bottas up there as a guinea pig coming from the back and finishing in the fourth position, we can't really judge his pace because he was on a completely different agenda than Lewis Hamilton. It's really hard to compare how much of that was Mercedes was on and how much of that was just Lewis being Lewis. Hard to say, but it wasn't all straightforward for Max Verstappen, despite the fact that he drove a relatively I thought he had a clean weekend. Even though he got overtaken by Charles Leclerc on the first lap, he fought off Vettel well. He had that other wheel-to-wheel battle. He kept it clean, and he brought it home in second.
Yeah, he did a great job. I thought Albon, again, just doing what he's supposed to do at this part of his career. Remember, he's a rookie. He didn't drive for somebody else last year like Charles Leclerc did. He didn't have some of the testing time that I think Lando Norris had some FP1s back in the day. George Russell had some FP1s back in the day. So he's really the truest of the rookies out there. I thought he did a decent job. Again, a lot of people are now starting, because Gasly's been doing good the second half of the season, feeling like Gasly kind of got jobbed a little bit, that maybe it was unfair that he got sent down. Eric, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, at the time he got sent down, we were basically like, Gasly's trash.
And Gasly had to
anything well.
He had to mop the floor with Kvyat, and he has done exactly that.
Yes, to me, it's been a win-win for everything. I think Gasly has a chance to. He's more relaxed. He's with a team that he gets along well with. Does he deserve another shot at Red Bull? Christian Horner says he does. Albon now will have another year to prove that he belongs, but he's going to have to start challenging.
He has to continue to improve.
That podium at Brazil would have been big for him.
It definitely would have. It's partly artificial because it would have only happened because Bottas blew up, because the Ferraris collided. The thing is, he's got to start to match up to the pace of Max Verstappen, and that is a tall order. Danny Rick could do it, and you know where I think Red Bull just didn't get the timing right? So much about the driver lineup up and down the grid at the top teams and even the midfield teams is based on timing. Remember who Red Bull was grooming for that seat, and then the timing wasn't right, and they had to let him go? Carlos Sainz Jr.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that lineup right now of Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz Jr.? I think they would have beaten Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship this year with a slower car if they had Carlos Sainz in a full season with all the experience that he has in F1 now. He's kind of bounced around.
I think you're right.
That's the driver they want, but they let him go because they had Danny Ricciardo, and they didn't think that Danny Rick was going to walk. But after Danny's perceived favoritism towards Max Verstappen, I really don't think that the friction between Max and Danny was all that bad. I think it was Danny not feeling the love from the team, feeling that the team had decided that they were for Max, whether that was management or in the garage or whatever. I never got the impression that Danny and Max couldn't coexist. I don't think Danny wanted the odds stacked against him by his own team. That was my impression of the whole Ricciardo departure. But it left them in a lurch because they weren't ready. Even though they had a junior team with Gasly, with Kvyat, and now with Albon in the picture, their man, they let walk a couple, like 1 or 2 seasons before. They had lent Carlos Sainz to Renault and then didn't renew his contract. Yeah. By the way, isn't there a top driver who was looking for a ride at a top team who just got loaned to Renault? Might be let out of his contract? Esteban Ocon. That's one thing. It's so hard to figure out when you develop talent, sometimes you develop them,
and
there's nowhere to put them.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to put them. And then when you need them, they're already gone. You look at Mercedes was left in a lurch when Rosberg retired. They had to go buy Valtteri Bottas from Williams because they didn't have someone there. And now they're trying to figure out the timing of how long do we keep Bottas? How long does Lewis Hamilton stay here? Now they've got Ocon is committed to 2 years with Renault with no out clause to rejoin Mercedes. That kind of promotes George Russell into the mix.
Yeah, I don't think Ocon will end up in a silver car. I think it's going to be Russell, unless they both end up in silver cars.
But what if Hamilton and Bottas keep on delivering and they want to stay? If Bottas pressures Hamilton for the World Championship next year, which you hear all the stories about what Bottas had been through personally the last year and a half, keeping it to himself, but he did just announce that he's separating from his wife.
Hate that for him.
Absolutely, but it could refocus him on his driving career. Remember when Lewis Hamilton and Nicole Scherzinger famously split? Lewis was a man possessed to succeed in his career after that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's necessarily what was holding Bottas back or that it could change, but I do believe he's got the right stuff in him. Can he hang with Lewis Hamilton for an entire season? I haven't seen anything that shows me he definitely can. But if he keeps going out and winning 4 or 5 races, it's really hard to argue with this driver pairing. It works. So, when does George Russell start getting sick of sitting at Williams? It's all about timing. It's so hard to get right. What we were talking about.
I promise you, the minute he got in that car during testing,
the Mercedes,
he went, holy crap!
Yeah, now he's got to go back to his shopping cart with the wobbly wheel back at Williams. Another team that could be screwed by this whole timing, and I don't think it's going to happen, but my wife and I were batting around the idea of what if these rumors are true and Vettel just retires right now. He's just over it, just had his 3rd son, sick of getting outclassed by Leclerc and having the whole world say you haven't got it. He doesn't need this.
Nope.
He's not helping his reputation unless he comes back and wins the world championship. That's the only happy ending there is for Sebastian Vettel and his fans right now. What if he retired? Ferrari would be screwed. Who would they call? Kimi Räikkönen? Giovinazzi's not ready.
No, not at all.
They wouldn't put a rookie in there. They're loading up on talent right now in Formula 2 with Mick Schumacher leading the Ferrari development.
You wouldn't put Alonso in for a year or two, would you? A year?
They'd have to think about it, and they'd also probably start calling Renault about their giant Danny Ricciardo contract and ask them how negotiable is that. Oh, she would. She actually told Danny Ricciardo to his face, please don't drive for Ferrari. So it's all about timing, and it's hard to get right, as Red Bull is learning right now, because, God, you got to believe they would love to have a lineup of Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz, because Carlos could hang with Max when they were at Toro Rosso.
Yeah, what a great job by McLaren. Unbelievable season and turnaround for them. Sainz ends up 5th in the points. That's unbelievable. What a great drive for him. If I'd have told you at the beginning of the year...
P6.
Sorry, 6. If I'd have told you at the beginning of the year that Sainz would outpoint Danny Ricciardo by 42 points, you'd have told me what?
I would have said you were dreaming if that was going to be the gap.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be a good fight among the McLarens and the Renaults. McLaren distanced themselves from those yellow cars pretty admirably over the course of the season. They're obviously the best in the mid-pack. What's really impressive is that he beat Gasly and Albon, who both had half a season in a Red Bull, and both of them looked pretty good in the Toro Rosso as well.
Yep.
It took a last lap pass by Carlos Sainz. My favorite was when he was like, what do you mean? It wasn't on TV? Oh, no. Because he happened to make his move at the exact moment that Lewis Hamilton crossed the finish line. But I believe it was Hülkenberg on the final lap just sailed up the inside and got the car slowed down just in time to avoid contact. Poor Hülkenberg had to check up so bad he lost 10th and 11th to Danny Ricciardo. It looked like he was going to get one final point for now in his F1 career. You think about what could have been for Nico Hülkenberg, but Carlos Sainz said it felt like winning the world championship. He was fired up.
It was cool, too. So he ends up 6th. Norris ends up getting Rookie of the Year, which is super cool. I thought it was great that Sainz got his podium at Brazil, but they were head-to-head in qualifying going into this, and Lando out-qualified him. So they each kind of got a little one-up on each other because at least visually from the outside looking in, and I've never gotten the impression from those that are inside that it's any different, this is probably the most harmonious duo of drivers at a team that we've seen in a long time.
And you look at the gap from where they finished in the standings, and I don't think if you look at the numbers, it really tells the tale of the performance between Sainz and Norris. So I'm glad you brought up that qualifying thing, because Norris finished, 13th in points, well behind Carlos Sainz, but he had far more reliability problems, a little bit of growing pains as a rookie is to be expected, but I think he's almost as quick as Carlos coming in as a rookie, which is high praise for Lando Norris. But if you watch the battle between Lando Norris and George Russell last year in Formula 2 and in GP3 the year before with Charles Leclerc in the mix, you knew that those three guys have success written all over them. And I think we're all looking for more things to come, assuming that McLaren can continue this upward trend. We know they've got Renault engines for next year, but they've signed on for Mercedes power in 2021.
Yeah, there's not really much to talk about the rest of the field down there. Toro Rosso obviously had the split driver in one of their cars. They had an okay season. I give them a C season. Not much out of Racing Point, though I don't know that we really expected a whole lot.
I thought put up 52 points. That's just behind Danny Ricciardo.
Yeah, I thought Checo did pretty good.
Checo
Stroll
gets high
had
marks.
A couple of races where he looked like he belonged, because for many people he doesn't. But he certainly has good job security with his dad owning the team.
He sure didn't look good this past weekend. That was not a good look when he slid wide on, what was it, the first or second corner, clipped Pierre Gasly.
Ruined his race.
Yeah, tipped him into a spin into Sergio Perez. He was lucky he didn't take out his teammate with that move. It wasn't intentional, but he just slid wide. And I think it was Gasly in post-race said something like, it's always the same with this guy.
Yeah.
I don't think people trust him to race wheel to wheel. Not that he's necessarily trying to crash into you. It's that he doesn't have control of the situation around him. He doesn't know when to lift off that half second earlier because the car's heavy on fuel. He doesn't do that math in his head, and the physics don't work out in reality on the racetrack for him.
Alpha, they had an okay season. There were races where Kimi looked all right.
Crap weekend, great season.
Giovinazzi had one or two races where he looked like he had it. The rest looked like a rookie. I know a lot of people are kind of, I don't know about that one. I think that's Ferrari kind of keeping an Italian on the grid and giving him one more chance to kind of see what he's going to do. Haas, we've talked about at length. They couldn't seem to get out of their own way. I don't think there was probably a team on the grid that was more excited for the checkered flag to fall than Haas. They wanted this year over, and then
Haas and Williams
Williams
wait for this to
there's
be over.
Not even light at the end of the tunnel with Williams.
Well, the good news is you got a rules revolution 1 year from now, and hope springs eternal. You never know what you can do when you take the car out, throw it away, and you start from scratch. And Williams has had a long time to think about what they've done wrong and how to do it differently for next year. Hopefully, they're able to take that extra time that they could have spent developing this car, using it as a test, and they roll out and they're competitive. I'm not expecting them to be getting into Q2 and Q3 on a regular basis right off the bat, but hopefully they can get up there and start beating some cars on raw pace and on merit, not just passing people because there was contact or because of a pit stop. Because right now, it's about the only way you see a Williams in front of somebody is if it's the very start of the race and there was a grid penalty or if someone was backwards in a gravel trap. That's not what we want to see, and hopefully they can start to hoist themselves up by their bootstraps because that's the only way it's going to happen. You and I have been talking about this for months now.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is going to be how long can they keep George Russell in that car before he jumps. And I think he's in a silver car
I think Bottas is going to feel the pressure. If Bottas doesn't deliver early and often next year, they're going to be looking at George Russell, especially when we see what Russell does to Latifi.
Yeah.
I don't think we got an accurate picture of what Robert Kubica was really made out of because I think Russell is that good.
Yeah. We're going to power right through. No commercial today, but I do want to remind everybody, if you want a chance, your last chance, the last month to try to win a free set of tires, any kind of tires, off-road tires, streetcar tires, they make them all. Go to HerculesTire.com/MRN. Register for a chance to win. We've had, did Sunday Money podcast with Corey LaJoy earlier. We've had a winner. Was somebody who said that they heard the commercial during Sunday Money. So it's possible to win. You never know when you need tires, but when you do, it's never fun to dig into that wallet and have to buy them. So a chance to win a free set, go to HerculesTire.com/MRN. I got some stats for you here, Eric, that I saved on the screen that F1 put up. End of the year head-to-head qualifying by team. Hamilton out-qualified Bottas 14-7. I thought that was bigger than I thought it would be because Bottas has been really good at qualifying, but that's a butt-whipping right there.
I think when Bottas beat him, it was for pole position, though.
Yeah.
I think Hamilton only had 5 pole positions. Bottas may have beaten him in that. I don't have that number right in front of me.
Leclerc out-qualified Vettel 12-9. Verstappen 19-2 over the other drivers that were in Red Bull.
That's to be expected.
Yeah. Norris out-qualified Sainz 11-10. That's about they're so equal. It's such a great run by Lando Norris when you think about the experience of Sainz and the talent there. Ricciardo 14-7 over Hülkenberg. I mean, as much as people want to keep talking about Hülkenberg, and Steve Machett made a lot of jokes toward David Hobbs, and you've mentioned it on the podcast before, it was Hobbs that had basically crowned the kid before he had done anything, but he got beat up by his teammate pretty good this year. And those are just, if you're going to be a champion in a championship car, you have to take care of, your own team and the opportunities presented, and he's just not done that. So Ricciardo got the best of him in qualifying. The combo of Albon and Gasly, 13-8 over Kvyat. Perez, 18-3 over Stroll. I don't think that's a big surprise. Raikkonen, 12-9 over Giovinazzi, a little bit closer than I would have expected there. Magnussen out-qualified Grosjean, 13-8. That one maybe a little bit bigger gap. It's pretty close to even, but that's
wait for it.
A little bit bigger gap. And then Russell, 21-0 over Kubica.
I was really rooting for Robert at Abu Dhabi. You don't want to get whitewashed. It doesn't happen very often. I think Alonso shut out Stoffel Van Dorn either last year or the year before. Like I said, it's really hard to judge the success of Robert Kubica's comeback because of the pace of the car wasn't there. The only thing to measure him against is George Russell, keeping in mind that Kubica was the driver that scored points when the opportunity was there, and I don't think any of us thought that was going to be possible this year.
No, but your man Hobbs said last night he thought it was a terrible decision both by Robert and by the team to put him in a Formula One car.
I disagree. I disagree completely.
I mean, he was pretty adamant about it, that he thought it was just an awful, horrible idea.
I think for Kubica to prove that he had the mental strength and the pace to come back 9 years after a partially severed right arm shows that he had the strength to be a world champion.
Yeah.
We knew he had the pace, but some people don't have the mental capacity to fight and do what it takes to beat not only your teammate but the rest of the world to win these championships. I think it was a huge gut check that he was able to get back. And if Williams is this far back, then what is the harm in having an experienced driver who can help you develop? I don't think that you're going to see all of the contributions that Kubica made to this team in the short term. You're going to see it show up next year, kind of like all the stuff that Alonso and Sainz did with McLaren last year paid off at the hands of Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris this year.
Yeah.
I think that having two rookies in the car this year, knowing it was that bad in the offseason, would have been very difficult to start the rebuilding process. They did get quicker over the course of the year. They didn't get to the point where they could take the fight to anybody in a normal weekend, but they did close that gap. They were 3, 4, 5 seconds back, and by the end of the year, they were 2 to 3 seconds back. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's hard to find a second in a Formula One car, especially when everybody else is developing. And I do think that part of that is Kubica, and I think part of that success that we could see from Nicholas Latifi could be credited to having a veteran like Kubica. Yes, it's a feel-good story gone partially wrong, but I still feel good about it.
I agree with you 100%, and I would also counter what David Hobbs said by saying if Kubica is not a value to a team, then why are there two teams fighting over him being their sim driver?
Exactly.
Right? If you can't drive a modern Formula One car with one arm, then why do two Formula One teams want him to be their development sim driver?
And I think to say that he can't use the arm is an exaggeration.
I do too.
If he could get through the Lowe's hairpin at Monaco, which is a left-hander with a bum right arm, then he can do just about anything that you need to do in a Formula One car right now.
One of the other cool stats that was out there, Eric, was which drivers finished ahead more often at each team. I found these interesting. Some of them kind of pretty basic. Obviously, Hamilton at Mercedes, Vettel at Ferrari, Verstappen at Red Bull. Here was one I was surprised about. At Renault, it was Hülkenberg.
Which is crazy because Ricciardo finished so much higher up in the points. He scored 54 points and finished in the 9th position overall, whereas Hülkenberg was 13th with only 37 points. And in between them on the standings was Perez, Norris, and Raikkonen.
Magnussen at Haas, Sainz at McLaren, Perez at Racing Point, Raikkonen at Alfa Romeo, Gasly at Toro Rosso, and Williams, it was George Russell. Just some pretty cool stats. And another interesting thing, I know it's going to change next year, what you said, Mexico City.
Yeah, next year it's going to be the Mexico City Grand Prix instead of the Mexican Grand Prix.
So that will join Abu Dhabi as the only city-named Grand Prix. I found that interesting. Abu Dhabi, one of the 8 United Arab Emirates, along with Dubai, and that's as many as I can name. I'm out at Dubai.
There are so many weird historical names for Grand Prix. Remember when the European Grand Prix wasn't in Europe? Because they ran it in Azerbaijan.
Oh, nice.
The first couple of years we were at Baku, they called it the European Grand Prix, and I'm like, that is not in Europe, is it?
That one's a little odd. Couple of just finish up things on the 2019 season. We've talked a little bit about the testings. As we mentioned, the test that's going out at Abu Dhabi, Bottas was fastest, I think 137.5, so pretty quick with the stuff they're doing for next year. The 2020 tires, we talked a little bit about that. I think Romain Grosjean said, at times it does what we were hoping it to do. It falls off more. They don't have as many difficulties with heat, but then you'll put on another set and they're just awful. So he said it's,
but can we trust a Haas on its tires?
Yeah, everybody's just saying they're just not quite there yet. Obviously, Pirelli blamed the cold weather at Austin and the limited amount of time to be the issue. They've got like 6 sets of every compound to try to run when they're out there, and they have a designated time. They don't have to just squeeze it in. Like, there's a period of time where that's all you run on, and still everybody's just like, I don't know, it might work at this track, but overall, so my gut kind of tells me we're probably going to keep the same tire for next year, knowing that you're going to have a whole different size of tire and compounds for 2021. I just don't think they're going to squeeze it in there, but so far the tire's not being well liked. And some interesting thing, if you go to motorsport.com, they have great coverage over there. But, Eric, they have an aerial view through a drone of what's going to be an 18-degree banked final corner at Zandvoort. That's going to be cool.
That's a lot more banking than these cars have ever gone on. You think about what's at Indianapolis. If you go back to the old Nürburgring, and I know the Nordschleife hasn't been used for F1 since, 1976. You had the carousel. You had the X-Mole as a little bit of a bank corner, but this is a huge unknown. The question is, will it help passing at all, Tony?
They hope it will. What was the banking at Monza back in the day?
Oh, crazy, stupid.
Way
40,
more than 18,
40, yeah, that was... They stopped using that, I believe, in the early 60s.
I like the idea of them trying it because that was one of the things that came up at Abu Dhabi. I think Lewis Hamilton, several drivers said that this racetrack with all its off-camber, fall-off corners, that they really just can't race. There's just not enough overtaking areas. And he almost said that a few of the corners he'd like to see changed and maybe add a little banking in some areas and widen them out and make them more full runs or complete stops and turns.
Kind of like turn 1 at Austin, where you've got a huge amount of space to run a couple different lines and things like that.
So he'd like to see a track change there, which is interesting because it's a really cool track. And having never driven a Formula One car except on a simulator, when you run it on the simulator, it's got a really good flow to it. It's really fun, but I guess the modern cars, they just can't race there.
I think it's going to be like Catalunya. It's going to be a driver's track, especially in qualifying. You're going to love the way it flows. It's already a classic.
Yeah.
They raced back there in the 60s and 70s. I just don't think it's going to produce exciting racing. Hopefully it'll be better than what we saw.
You're talking about. Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be better than what we saw at Paul Ricard. By the way, that's in the news. They're talking about drastically changing the layout. I won't be able to tell on television because I'm still dizzy from the last French Grand Prix with all those crazy striped runoff areas. I have no idea where that track goes.
It's awful.
I get vertigo thinking about it.
It's pretty crazy. All right, that's all I have. I know you've got a little bit of a Morse code report, don't you?
Yeah, we do. Formula 2 was in action this past weekend at Abu Dhabi. And in race 1, the feature was Sergio Sette Camara getting his first ever feature win. He was on pole position, but he fell to third after a bad start, but he was able to fight his way past Louis Delatraz. It's his third career victory in Formula 2 after his 2 previous wins came in the reverse grid sprint format. Speaking of the reverse grid sprint format, it was Luca Ghiotto chasing down the reverse grid pole sitter Giuliano Alesi to claim his 4th win of the season, going out in style.
Is that Jean Alesi's boy?
It is, yeah. Giuliano Alesi. Alesi eventually slid down to finish in the 5th position, the second-generation French driver. Luca Ghiotto was able to jump Sergio Sette Camara to claim 3rd in the final point standings. However, Sette Camara in the news for other reasons. He has been linked to Dale Coyne Racing as one of the drivers on the short list to replace Sebastian Bourdais in that vacant seat. Other drivers being considered besides Sergio Sette Camara include Alex Palou, the Spanish-born Japan Super Formula driver, and also some Canadian named Jimmy Hinchcliffe's.
Oh.
So the mayor, not out yet. There is a chance for him to land on this grid. There's still some open seats besides Coyne, especially at Carlin and A.J. Foyt. So we'll keep an eye on that,
that would
as
be
silly
super
season
cool.
progresses.
How cool would it be in the future, and I don't think we'll ever see it, though you never know with Charles Leclerc, to see an Alesi Schumacher pairing at Ferrari?
Well,
wouldn't that be cool?
I think they banged into each other a couple times on the grid earlier this year in Formula 2. But I do think both of them are still a little bit of a ways away there.
Yeah, I know Mick needs a lot of seasoning.
We've already got Verstappen up there.
Yeah,
it sounds like the mid 1990s already when you string all these names together. What else is going on? Baja 1000. We were updating you on the progress of Alex Rossi a week ago, and I think I said he would probably not be the. He's definitely not the first and probably not the last world-class driver to put it in the ditch. Well, that didn't take long. Jenson Button actually had a mechanical failure, broken diff, spent 17 hours stranded in the Mexican desert. Welcome to Baja, Jenson.
Ugh.
Can you imagine how different that must be from, winning the Monaco Grand Prix and all the things that come with that, and living in Monaco as a retired F1 driver, to spend 17 hours with your co-driver, and the only people they saw were fellow racers, and the racers kept stopping. Hey, could you help us clean our headlights?
Oh, my gosh. Tough break for Jenson.
That's why they call Baja one of the most challenging races on the planet. Also, some news about the World Endurance Championship. We talked about their schedule being a little dicey with Interlagos. They were not able to fulfill their contractual obligations. Guess who stepped into the rescue?
I know this. Austin.
Circuit of the Americas is on the World Endurance Championship calendar for the first time since 2017. That race is fast approaching, Tony. February 22nd, 23rd, just a few months away. If you like those cars that you see racing the 24 Hours of Le Mans, you can see them in Texas just 2 months from now. Go check it out. I can't recommend it enough. Great track. Tony can attest to that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fun. I guess the last thing to do before we let everybody go, we've mentioned it before. We told people on social media we attended a night at the races. It was Leigh Diffey, David Hobbs, and Steve Machett. The NBC Formula One broadcasting crew got together at the Booth Playhouse here in Uptown Charlotte. I'm going to say a crowd, what would you say, about 150, 200 people?
Oh, at least, yeah. There was only a few empty seats in there. They really filled out nicely.
Basically a chance to kind of review the 2019 season, hear some stories about what the guys have been up to. And I think while all that was great, the highlight was the special guest, the surprise special guest, Simon Pagenaud, Mr. May, won everything at Indy in May. Indy 500 champion came up on stage. That was super cool.
Yeah, I did not expect to see him there, especially when they talked about what his calendar had been. He was bouncing all around the country. He only had one day / evening where he was going to be home in the Charlotte area where he lives, not too far from the Penske headquarters in Mooresville, North Carolina. It was the only day he was going to be available, and he took time out of his busy schedule to come down and chat with Steve Machett and David Hobbs, about another Indy 500 veteran driver that we've had on the show before, talking about what it means with Indianapolis. They talked about the IMS takeover from Penske, purchasing the IndyCar series as well as the Speedway. Simon seemed just as surprised as we did, which kind of surprised me that he didn't know it was coming. He found out about 10 minutes before we did. He got a phone call, and he said, wait, what? Yeah. But it was really fun. I mean, Simon's such a great guy. You can't help but root for the guy after you've met him. He's so pleasant and cordial, but he's so witty, too. And to be funny in 2 different languages, that's got to be hard. But he was talking about going back to France. He's still not done with his media tour in France from winning the Indy 500, so he was off on his way to complete that before the year ends.
Yeah, it was a really great night. Those guys are hilariously funny, having Machett take shots at David Hobbs. They played an old 72?
The Hagar
slacks. What was the line at the end there?
Some slacks, eh? Yeah. Something like that. It was hilarious. Just YouTube David Hobbs Hagar slacks. 30-second ad that did not age well.
A lot of fun people at the event that came out. Rick Allen from NBC Sports was there. Matt Yoakum from Fox. We saw Steve Letarte, former crew chief in NASCAR that's also on the NBC broadcast, was there. Frank Wilson, who really gave the guys kind of the start back at the Speed Vision days. He was there. There was a Formula One photographer that got up and explained kind of the life of being a photographer in Formula One and other motorsports, showed some of his shots. That was really terrific. Good audio, video, chance to ask
lots of
questions.
Presentations. They did a montage of Kimi Radio. They played some Sam Posey essays. There was a special message that was taped from Will Buxton in Abu Dhabi.
I love Will Buxton.
Yeah, it was. If they said this was the 10th time they've done this over the last couple of years, and they usually choose a different city each time. If you see this come up in your area, you're a race fan, you got to go. Yeah. It's absolutely worth it.
And they're 3 of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, especially Diffey. Diffey's just out of this world, sincerely kind. Hobbs will talk to anybody, and he loves to talk racing. And as you mentioned, even at his age, he still knows the details. He knows the stats. He's still following it into it. Just a really good thing. If you get a chance to check them out, definitely do so. Eric, it has been so much fun. Obviously, if any news breaks during the offseason testing, we'll come in here, maybe 5-10 minutes, we'll bounce something out.
I think we should do like maybe a Rolex 24/silly season update, maybe. Like a Rolex preview, and then we can get really into high gear in February as the grid will be the pecking order starting to be established at the preseason tests. IndyCar kicks into gear in March. As we mentioned, the Rolex 24 is such a unique event because there's nothing else really going on in the world of global motorsports with the exception of maybe the Dakar Rally. But it lends itself to so many world-class drivers making their way to a very unusual racetrack. You don't see these banked corners on an oval where there's only like 2 or 3 hard braking points, but lots of passing zones and stuff like that. So it's a race that attracts some real exceptional talent. We already know Kamui Kobayashi is coming back to defend his title that he won last year with Fernando Alonso. Lots of changes up and down the IMSA grid. So I think, if we pop in, maybe say hello to everybody in January, that way they don't forget we exist.
That's right.
Talk about what's coming up and get ramped up for the season that lights go out in March down in Australia.
And as always, you can follow us at Racing Snobs on the amazing Twitter machine. We're always posting there and stuff. We're going to eventually get Eric on Twitter. He doesn't want it to consume his life.
I'm a late holdout.
He sees how it consumes everybody's life, and it's typically negative, so he's done the right thing up until now.
Luckily, if there's something interesting on Twitter, Tony shows me.
Maybe we can get him on the F1 so he only sees the F1 stuff and doesn't have to deal with the rest. But
now I'm chasing spoilers. I have to work NASCAR. That's one of the main reasons I have to avoid social media is because I don't get to watch these races until I'm done working NASCAR.
It was difficult on Sunday because we didn't start watching until probably, 9:15. And I kept, out of instinct, wanting to grab my phone. I'm like, I can't grab it yet. I got to see how this race ends. So.
See, I went to a hockey game at noon, and we had some friends who wanted to watch the race. And they're like, well, we'll come over at like 5 p.m. And I'm like, 5 p.m.? I basically had to just like disable my phone at all times. We didn't watch the race until probably 6. Yeah. Luckily, I didn't spoil it for myself. I've got about a 50% success rate of not spoiling the race for myself or through others and other forms of technology and communication. So, it's a hard sell to put Twitter on there because that's one more way I can blow it for myself. But I'll think about it.
That's true. Well, we can't thank you guys enough. I mean, you've made this a top 5 show at Motor Racing Network, and it was something that Eric and I really just wanted to do because we love to talk about the snobby sports, and nobody here in this building really cares about them.
We just had a big argument following Australia in the break room about Ferrari versus Mercedes, and we're like, well, we could record this and see if it's got legs. Looks like it does.
Yeah,
thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. Again, at Racing Snobs on the Twitter machine, and just, if you've subscribed to the podcast, you'll know when we do a new one, and we'll do our best to get you out there. We talked to Diffey's willing to do it next time. Hobbs is always on. We're reaching out to Will Buxton. In fact, Diffey said, I'm going to remind Buxton he needs to do your show. Machett, we're going to reach out to. He seems to be pretty cool about doing it, too. So we'll have some special guests next year as well, and maybe a few drivers in here. That'd be really cool. If you remember, we had a great year with drivers. We had Hinchcliffe. We had Rossi. We had Connor Daly. I mean, we had some pretty good names on here, and John Andretti was great hearing from John this year. I thought it put him in really good spirits because I know he's been struggling, but the chance to talk to some racing, I thought it picked him up a little bit. It was a great year, Eric.
Heck yeah, let's do it again.
Sounds good. All right, for Eric Morse, I'm Tony Rizzuti. I got to hit the button. For all of us here on American Racing Snobs, thanks so much for listening. We cannot wait. Australia, March 13th through the 15th. We'll be back, as always, with another American Racing Snob.